Welcome everyone to the Voices of a Black Man. My name is CK James, and today we have the pleasure of talking with none other than Zack Hawkins. Now, the Voices of Black Men is a platform for Black men to have a safe space to be seen and heard for them, dispelling stereotypes that Black men are silent, which equals absent, or angry, which equals aggressive. All Black men don't fit in those boxes. Black men come from various backgrounds, education levels, experiences. They have different aspirations and different dreams. And so I am honored today, Zack, to have you on to be able to speak to you and have you tell your story through your lens. How are you today?
I'm doing incredibly well. I appreciate the opportunity. This is an amazing series, and so hats off to you for pulling it off and organizing it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, the truth is, I just saw the narrative of the Black man being told, but the Black man was absent from it. And so I said, hey, we got to get you guys in this picture so that we can have a full picture and people can really be educated before
That's
they start
exactly right.
making decisions.
That's exactly right.
So, I'm just going to jump right in. And I'd like to start at a place of tell us about young Zack growing up. Where did he grow up?
Oh man. So I don't know, and you would know this because of our shared institution, but I grew up in a place called Chocowinity, North Carolina. And so Chocowinity is alongside the Pamlico and the Tar River in Beaufort County, North Carolina. So going towards Greenville on your way to the coast. And so Chocowinity had about 800 people. I graduated with about 39 of them. And but as the county, Chocowinity, the original Washington, it was a really good community. And so growing up there, I had incredible grandparents that sort of like my mom. It was a single mom. My dad from Trinidad and Tobago. They were together for about 10 years. He went to New York, went back to New York. They split. We still stayed in contact, but I still grew up in a small town with, my mom who served a lot of different roles. And so then insert my grandparents. And so my grandfather, this ex-military guy who was born in 1930, still thought he was a sharecropper and it's like he was military. So we all, you couldn't be in bed after 7 o'clock. We worked the fields and grew everything that we ate. I was his labor. I learned how to drive a tractor well before I knew how to drive a car. And so hard work and those things were something that was really ingrained in us. And so my grandmother was someone who was incredibly involved and engaged in her community. And that's really where my spark for public service came from, because she just, she served her church for 30 years. She was a teacher for 30 years. I mean, she just did it all and did it all well. And so they really set a big path for me. But the young Zack was, let's see, broke arm, trying to flip a 10 speed, and flipping bikes and doing those kinds of things. I loved basketball, loved sports, played 3 sports in high school, but was really trying to, in many, many ways, find my own path, right? I used to wear this Black Inventor shirt, and this sort of goes along with that identity of trying to find yourself and see yourself so that you can create success for yourself. And, looking for those examples, but it was really hard to find, to be completely honest. I knew that I wanted to be this professional guy, but I didn't really know how to get there. And so there were a lot of teachers and people in my path that made it all possible. But one thing that really struck me growing up is that no matter how small your community was, you were not immune to what was happening nationally. So the drug epidemic hit us incredibly hard. People that I knew, who died, went to jail, got involved, just involved, because there was a lack of resources and a lack of opportunity. And these were people who were smart. They were athletically inclined. And I was naive enough to think, okay, well, everybody goes to college after they graduate from high school, and realize that there are a lot of factors that are bearing down on communities like us. Now, I didn't know all the technical terminology, but I did realize the dynamic. And so yeah, young Zack was, full of energy and wanted to conquer the world. And a lot of him still lives in me, even though I've embraced the way that the world is, and I still want to try and change it.
Okay. Wow. So let me talk a little bit or delve a little bit into, because you talked about you come from a community where you didn't realize at the time, but kind of looking back and over time you realize that certain resources weren't there and things that
Yeah,
you just knew as normal, like going to
yeah,
college, wasn't everybody's normal. Um,
yeah,
Talk a little bit about the influences that you had that drove you, because you say that there was no one really around you that kind of was professional, because everybody was farmers and sharecroppers and just
yeah.
making a living, right? So where did you find that mentor or that person to kind of model after, and how did you get to college?
Yeah, no, good question. So you're exactly right. And so people were, working hard every day, making ends meet. You had, teachers were, top of the food chain, which they should be. Um, and what we sort of had was a dynamic where people went, directly to, to the factories and to other places to. They were at a point where they could make an honest day's living. So these are, they were really good people. But what I learned early is that you have to take nuggets from everybody, right? And there were some people who were, really athletically inclined. Okay, I said, well, I really want to do that. Let's try to see what makes them tick. There were some people who were, really well respected because of their presence, right? And so, okay, how do you get presence? But really, what set me on the path was I was probably about ninth grade, and this guy who went to Elizabeth City State University was doing his graduate teaching at my high school, and so I think he was a coach and he was an AP. So this brother walks in, shirt and tie, jacket, professional as all get out. And then I saw this thing on his arm, this brand on his arm, and he, told us about it. And of course, he was doing some of that, stuff. And he had the range that I was looking for, right? Like, yes, I want to be fun and outgoing and talk junk with the boys and play football rough and tumble, but then also be able in any space that I occupy be able to handle myself as a professional. And I was like, done, that's it. And so it clicked when I met him that that's exactly where and who I wanted to be. And so the story goes on, and after that sort of started my service in student government for 4 years in high school. Really trying to build leadership. I had a lot of teachers that did not look like me who gave me opportunities and who made sure that I made my path. And a lot of that I can attribute to my grandmother and my sisters, both of which served. They both finished like 1 and 2 in their class ahead of me. My grandmother at one point served on the school board to fill an unexpired term, and so there was an expectation of my family that I did not meet a lot of times, but I still had that expectation to meet. And so being able to have that expectation and being given a little grace was helpful for me. But I also, saw this guy and said, this is exactly sort of it. I don't know, again, how I manifest it, but this is exactly the path and what I want to do and what I want to be. And so my most of the folks, I'm from a town where most folks went to HBCUs. So it was, my grandmother. I'm a legacy kid from Elizabeth City State. I had North Carolina Central, North Carolina A&T, you name it, across the board. My sister, both of my sisters, one went to state, one went to Carolina, the older two, and so they were ahead of me, and so that was an anomaly. And so I sort of followed the family path, and I had friends who had gone. So I was like, you know what, this is perfect. They gave me that incentive scholarship, which they do not have around anymore. And it was an amazing way because my family would not have been able to, pay the full freight at that time. So it was perfect. And I had been up there for homecomings, and it just made me feel like I was home. It really, really did. I'm in a space where I can be myself right now. As you well know, going to college, you find a wide array of people. Some people, I don't know if they should be there. Some people are like, you know what, they are serious, right? And so I sort of fit in the middle. But I had an excellent time. I wanted to be a scientist, and so Elizabeth City had a really good biology department, and they didn't have all the things that I was looking for, but they helped me navigate a way to figure that part out, right? And so I can't thank Elizabeth City State enough for being able to take this kid from a small town and grow just a little bit more, right? And then they set me up to grow a little bit more, and to eventually sort of become here. So that's sort of how I got here and how all these things came to be. It's a tangled web of a lot of different influences, and really honestly having to take everything that you could from every little person that you were involved with. I had one guy who his name was Joe Willie Brown, rest in peace. He was everything bad about society, but he lived across the street from us, and he told me, he said, "Zack, you are a leader." He said, "Don't let anybody tell you any different. You are a leader, and you are going places." And this was on a Sunday morning. I had just got my license, and I had been struggling to tie my tie. And I was like, "Oh man," he saw me, he said, "Come on over." He helped me tie it. And again, my grandmother is a master tire, but could not teach me. He teaches me this, I never forget it. And what it showed me, and again, it sort of goes into the theme of my life, is that you can find goodness in everybody. You can find something to learn from everybody. And so we shouldn't be in this mode of, I can only be this, I can only be that. Everybody has something to give you if you want to be a real comprehensive person. And as a Black man, you have to be able to do that. A lot of it from your own community, from the spread of folks who you will encounter, but also with people who don't look like you, right? There are nuggets to learn. And I think just in the Black experience, we can't be monolithic, right? We have to be able to touch and feel and taste every part of society for our own survival. And so that's sort of, again, how I sort of got, at least to the college phase of my life.
Yeah, and I want to go back really quickly and just clear up some things because we have a wide range of viewers. And so
Yeah.
they may not know or have never heard of HBCU. So just
All
so
right.
that I know
I'd
you
love to
look at
meet
me like, who haven't heard of that?
it.
But
Yeah, so
and so
historically Black colleges and university, which North Carolina has the most in the country, us in Alabama. And so there we have a combination of both public and private, ranging from Elizabeth City State to North Carolina A&T to North Carolina Central University, places like Livingstone, Barber Scotia, et cetera. And so my institution is, 1891 and in the early 1920s with North Carolina Central, just to play a pivotal role. And they, deserve to be continuously funded, and have just served as this place where African American students can come almost as a safe haven for 4 years, and again, be themselves, show up as themselves, see success. My grandmother, talked fondly about in the I think it was, she was there, she graduated in 54. So in the late 1940s, early 1950s, of being able to go to a place in a segregated time, but it still serves a purpose. I think it's some insane number of 70% of doctors, engineers, all these professions, most of them come from HBCUs.
yeah.
And so we still play an exorbitant role in society. And I think for a lot of kids, it's honestly like me, it was what I needed. I don't know if, now I probably could have gone and been successful at other institutions, but at the time, that's what I needed.
So growing up in Chocowinity, was
You said it
that
right.
I got it, Chocowinity. Um, I know you were scared for me. I know you were scared for me. But growing up, were you primarily in the African American community or was it mixed?
Yeah, good question. So my neighborhood, Chaco Village, was a Black community. And so it was built in 1968. So it was one of the first sort of like actual brick and mortar, home structures, along with one other that's in our town that had been built. It was a middle class neighborhood for a very, very long time, where you had, we had next door, we had Army vets, we had people who owned like the dry cleaners in the next town. We had barbers who lived down the street. And so we had a pastor and preachers who lived and had a community church. So it was really a solid place again, and continued to be until, the epidemics of the time really sort of hit, along with things like NAFTA, where you started to see those factory jobs leave. And
Mm.
so it mirrored a lot of what was happening. So we were kids who stayed outside all day, right? Didn't have a fear of being kidnapped, all those things, right? We were in a community where people knew us and sort of knew who we were. So it was an amazing backdrop looking back at it.
Wow, wow. So I have to ask, as a young man, when did you realize that you were not just a young man, but a Black man, and what did that mean to you?
Yeah, that was the second part of your story. And so if you're familiar with towns that are small, especially ones in Eastern North Carolina, there's not really you always know it.
Mm.
You always know it. And in our town, even though people, there were some issues, we were in our own way progressive. I'll never forget growing up and thinking it was completely normal to have a Black homecoming queen and a white homecoming queen, right? I heard stories. My mother integrated our high school, right? So she got spat upon, sort of integrating the schools and
Wow.
in her time, and so she that did not affect the way that she embraced and had friends of other cultures. I had friends that I spent the night with. They spent the night with me that didn't look like me,
Mhm.
but you knew that you did not have um, you knew you were Black, right? And there wasn't anything necessarily wrong with that, but it was just in small settings and towns like that. It's just really, really clear because, as you probably heard before, there's certain places you really don't go. There's certain things that, because of the way that the town evolved and the way that people have evolved, there's certain things you didn't do, right? And I think there was no real hostility, right, between folks, at least during most of my time. Now things popped up. I remember the O.J. Simpson trial. That was a lot growing up. But I think people would say some comments. You knew that certain sort of kids hung out in certain areas. But one thing that brought us all together was sports.
Mm.
And my neighborhood was this beacon of athletes of sports, and so that really helped with the divide. And then it's also hard, especially because we were, I guess, maybe 20 years later, for integration. We were one of those classes. Like, I've been knowing these kids since I was in fifth grade, right? I mean, or like kindergarten. I'm sorry, we went to kindergarten together, so I had those kinds of friends. But the thing that you did know is that there were, like, I had one friend that I did maybe two white friends that I did the whole let's go over your house, you come over mine, but that's about it. Um, and gosh, what was it? It was something else about that. Again, I talked about my sister and the homecoming queen. I think she was the first Black one. I'm escaping on the other ones, but it was a time that I think, oh man, I am so blanking, but it'll come back to me.
It'll
But
come back.
it'll come back. But I do think that you definitely learn a lot from understanding that. Oh, that's what it was. Is that the thing that did make it ultimately clear was, even though we were really, really cool in school,
Mhm.
they knew, and sometimes we knew when we saw each other at the grocery store and out in public with their parents, that, does that make sense? Like, I'll never
Mhm.
forget the
Mhm.
first time I was like, oh, hey, and they looked at me like I did not exist.
Mhm.
And they did it because they knew who their parents were. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
And
Not them. They weren't that way, but because they were with their parents,
that's
they
right.
knew that this is how I need to act.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
Wow.
right. Again, we had a lot of folks who grew up in a town who knew your family, so those kind of ingrained relationships made a difference.
Sure.
But you definitely knew, if you're asking for specific times when you're like, oh yeah, they don't necessarily get down with our kind, but for all those things that were underlying, we really, as a community, got along, and because of things like sports, because of going to school together. Again, there were some tensions. I'm not gonna lie, but a lot of people made it work, and I think they're better people for it. I
Mm.
think that I challenge my friends, especially with all that has been going on, as I said, well, guys, we grew up together. We did all this together. You should give another Black man that you meet the same courtesy that you would have given me. Does that make sense? Because I think that's what has been lost, is where you and I have to compete and be in, majority white spaces. Sometimes our counterparts don't have to. And so they're like, oh, okay, well, I got my one or two black friends, and okay, these are the folks I know, and everybody else is other.
Right.
And so we have to challenge them. And I have specifically challenged a lot of my white friends that I grew up with to think about that, to think about me when you're passing judgment or not, or when you're encountering someone and thinking about, how would you want them to treat Zack? And and that makes people step back for a second, right? And it sort of takes them out of that bubble of, like, what is it? You can't even use Friends as an example because they didn't have any black people in Friends, but the folks that you see, the groups that you see, they have the one black friend, right? Why is that? And we have to challenge them to think outside of it and be comfortable with embracing all folks. So, but anyway, that's
no, you lead to a great place. That let's talk about it a little bit, because one of the things that I've kind of feel, and I'm going to ask you how you feel about it, is in those spaces where you get access to spaces that not too many Black people get access to, tables where not too many people get access to, and we'll get to later kind of profession and how'd you get there and whatnot. But in that space, they're friendly to you because you're sitting at the table and they know you. Do you feel a weight at those tables when you walk into the room, or you're sitting at those tables? Do you feel a weight that's beyond yourself?
Yeah, I definitely used to. And after I left college, went to North Carolina Central, came to Durham, and started to get involved in politics a little bit, and started to get involved community wise. And instead of doing like my research on campus, I did NIHS, which blew my mind as a different. And so, yes, when you were in those spaces, having to sit at tables, the weight was that because, as I was explaining to someone else, you didn't want to be the stereotype. You didn't want to sound overly urban. You didn't want to do anything that made you feel separate and apart. And you wanted to try and mirror the experience and the culture that was around you, versus naturally showing up as yourself. And I think a lot of people sort of go through that. Now that I think that's then. I think as you progress and as you realize that if I don't say anything, this perspective is not at the table. And I think I learned that most importantly in sort of the politics, right? When I was working for David Price and some of these other places, and I, going to the ranks in the party, that's when I realized, like, well, Zack, this is the time, because you're making the time to be here, and by you making the time and showing up, you have to bring those perspectives to the table, because the other folks that you represent are too busy and have too much going on, or don't, like you said, don't have access, right? And so you do have an obligation beyond self. And I think that it's okay to have that extra pressure, right? And I know some people sort of push back against it. I think it's important to have it, because especially now, where the world has awakened to the plight of the Black experience, right? And started to even look at things like history and the way it's been told, and how we get treated by police, and how we don't have access to capital and all these things. If you don't speak up, you're really doing a disservice to yourself and future generations. And so, whereas I had to grow into that, and I think a lot of people who were my friends were having to grow and have those same sort of battles, it now is a completely different thing. So if I'm on the floor of the General Assembly, or if I'm, at my job with, high-level donors, or in the community, and talking to corporations, like, I am saying that specific thing. I should be in an America, in James Baldwin's America, I should be able to be exactly who I am on equal footing with anybody, and have my voice and my perspective, respected, just as I would for a Muslim American, a white American, whomever, a Latinx American. We are so much better together than we are separated. The hierarchy of um, of society, once you pull it back, you realize it's just BS, right? It's just completely BS. And I don't know if I'm just like Baldwin said, like you don't have to be anybody's Negro. And the better question is why do you need one? Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Why do you need a social hierarchy by race, by class, by whatever, to make yourself feel better? Like what's going on inside of you that makes you need that? And that's your burden, not mine. And so once I started to make that transition of it's not my burden. I'm gonna show up as me. I'm Zach. I'm Z-Hawk. I'm dad. I'm husband. I'm whoever. And you take it or leave it. Once you get to that point, you realize that that's for whomever else to sort out. Um, you realize that you get this freeing of showing up as your authentic self, and then it becomes so natural to talk about the perspective of your community. And again, I
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
it's a necessity.
Yeah, you brought up James Baldwin and the documentary I'm Not Your Negro. I tell everybody that they should watch. I don't care who you are because the
So far ahead of his
perspectives
time.
that are there are,
So,
oh my gosh, they're so profound for everybody, just as a human, right? There's a
that's
lot
right.
of things that you can take away. And I think the title turns a lot of people off to it, but I wish it would draw them to it to be able to really sit down and understand. If you understand who James Baldwin is and his philosophy, you would understand the documentary.
Well, see, the thing about it is, I'm glad you said that because I'm reading. Eddie Claude has a new book, of Begin Again, right? It's sort of what everything that Jim Baldwin was trying to teach us, and what he was so openly and very clear about is that it's about basic humanity.
Yeah.
Period. See my humanity. See me as a person. Don't be colorblind, right? See me, respect me, embrace me. I embrace you. We can talk across what we have in common, what we have in difference, and it still be okay in all love. And I think that, like you said, it is a little bit of, why is he saying that? I am not your Negro. I think it just it's important. It's important for him to say that though, right? Because it's
Yeah.
important to. That's almost the line in the sand, right? I am not this. Period. And if you think I am, then that's on you, not me.
Mhm.
But I do want people to embrace that, and that's really sort of where I am, again now and have been for years, is in that space of show up. I want to learn from you, right? I was sharing with someone yesterday that the thing that was so important about the political space is that I had to learn so much about everything else that it made me multicultural. Does that make sense? I
Yeah.
had to know holidays. I had to know things that were quirks and nuances because it was for the survival and to make sure that I was best, representing. And now clearly as a representative, I have to know those things, right? So I want to be able to appreciate and authentically show up as someone who's supportive of another community so that I can better understand it, so I can better represent. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah. Let's talk about your profession and kind of how you got there. Because we have viewers that may not be in North Carolina, they may not know exactly who you are or what you actually do. Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. You want to share?
Yeah, sure, sure. So first off, I am a dad of three amazing boys, two on the autism spectrum, an amazing wife, Tracy Hawkins, that I don't know how she does it. She just makes sort of making our world possible look easy. But I'm Zach, as I told you before. I went to the state of North Carolina, Central University. By day, I work at UNC Chapel Hill as a chief development officer for student affairs, which helps me remove financial barriers for kids who just have amazing talent. And then in my community, I serve as a state representative in the North Carolina House, serving Durham County District 31. And so I'm really personally in my sweet spot, right? It allows me to impact change because over time, what you realize and what I've realized is that there are people who feel helpless and hopeless, right? And they feel this every single day. They don't know where to go. They don't know where to turn. They don't have time to show up because they're busy making ends meet and putting food on the table. And once you know that, you have to do something about it, and you have to put yourself in the way, right? Like John Lewis said, you have to find a way to get in the way and make, not, good trouble, necessary trouble, but you just have to show up and make sure that you're carrying that perspective to wherever you are. And for me, that's in the house, at my job. And the other thing that I think is also important for me is that throughout my path, I served in as a teacher in Durham Public Schools and Southern High School in Durham. And it hit me like a ton of bricks that my experience as a high school student was not theirs, right? Something had gone wrong, terribly wrong in my opinion. Teachers were not valued, they were not paid in the same way. It was the first time that I saw teachers being teachers having to work all day and then go serve burgers and beers to make ends meet. And we weren't funding things for kids. I had this kid named Andre, brilliant kid from East Durham. He got later Justin's involved. This kid was so bright. I taught biology. I stepped back for the class session and let him teach genetics. That's how smart this kid was. Genetics.
Wow.
And so he had that kind of capacity to break it down and talk to his fellow students, black kid. And where do we go wrong, right? To not be able to unearth and maximize the talent of all these kids, especially kids of color. And so when you realize that that is the case, that's another point in your life where you have to be in the way to make sure that you remedy that. And so that experience honestly has led me both to my career as a representative and in my career in philanthropy. Because every time I get a chance to raise $1, some kid who should have a barrier removed does have that barrier removed. And every time we bring our perspective, raise our voice, pass good legislation, that means that someone else is able to maximize their God-given potential. And I get a chance to sort of be on the use both wings of that bird, right? In both sides of my life, and it's really refreshing to be in this space.
Wow. So now, mentors, were there a part of your life to get you here? I know we talked about mom and grandma and sisters. There were just 2 older sisters, or did you have younger siblings?
Yeah, I have a tangled web of siblings. Let's see, it's 8 of us total. My mother had my sister before me and my mom. My dad then got later remarried and had 4 more. So it's quite a bit. I'm right there in the middle though.
Gotcha.
And so all of them, my one deceased went to North Carolina Central, lived in Durham. My sister went to UNC Chapel Hill, as I talked about. Other one, NC State. Me, as I talked about. My other went to HBCU down in Florida. My other sister, East Carolina, and then younger ones that are still sort of coming up, K through 12, but are incredibly, incredibly smart and gifted. And so, it's wild because when you think about mentors, you also have to be mentors to your younger, brothers and sisters, and sometimes we're just mentors and sort of, confidants to each other. But I would say that mentors that I slept on as I was growing up, I'll start there and then progress, is my grandfather. I probably quote him more than anybody now because he gave so many nuggets of life that you just weren't paying attention to because, this kid. But I would say him in retrospect, and the words that he gave to live by are just phenomenal. And this guy barely finished high school, right? Like he walks on water. I would say after that, we definitely had teachers who definitely embraced. I think that there were community members who always made sure you just on the right path. Like, go on somewhere. You don't need to go around here. Does that make sense? Like, you're a last. What is it? They used to call it, say, you're the last of the Mohicans, right? We're counting on you to do something. And so these are people who, again, just as involved, who are giving me advice and telling me I see something in you. And so I don't care if you think that's a mentor or not. Anybody that's willing to teach you game of any kind is someone who is a mentor, right? And I don't think you take all advice, right? Because some of it's bad, but you definitely know that you can learn something from them. I would say that the gentleman that I mentioned, who's someone I keep in contact today, that sort of was that first guy. I would say that I have definitely been fraternity brothers who served in that role. People like David Price, who's a member of Congress, who I sort of how I got started. I would say that there were people in science, both who again who looked like me and both who did not, who just sat down and took time to talk to me and tell me. There have been older folks who were in their 60s and 70s who just in Durham and statewide who said, just hey, come here, let me tell you something. Let me tell you like how you should have handled X. And so I think that I have had, I don't know the word, I've had long-standing, but sort of these acute, mentor relationships or people that I can just call on. Some have been situational, some have been, for the time being. But I think that people have to realize about mentorship that it's not, it can be someone who you can call at any time, who you've known all your life, but sometimes it can be people that are just in situations, right? And some people who are just in the right place at the right time. And so I benefited from all of that. One story that I tell is, especially in politics, Courtney Crowder and I used to run around in early 2000s. We'd be the only young folks, right? And we would be, these giants that have now since passed, would just, tell us things and make sure that we could ask dumb questions. Does that make sense? They would, give you a little nugget about how to operate, in a space, or they would invite you somewhere so that you could learn. And you cannot underestimate the value of that. I would say that most recently, and someone who has been a longstanding, mentor is former Representative Mashaw, longest serving member of the North Carolina House. MLK got him involved in politics. He knew John Lewis and was involved. Now he said that I want down to get beat. He said, y'all can have all that walking across the bridge in Selma. I'm gonna go do my part. But he has been, both in his life experience and in what he's able to share with me, it's just been invaluable. And to have someone who has seen the world change that much, and has been directly involved and knew the players, he's seen these movies before, right? And so it's up to me to sort of pull out of him what is there. So he's been an amazing person. He has this poem that is, one of the most sort of authentically Black poems that you could ever hear of, and I'm glad to share it. But it just speaks to the fact that of all we said way back when Charlotte Hawkins Brown was his teacher, he was told that you're fine who you are. Embrace the sweetness of who you are and what you look like, your lips, your hair, your southern speech, your laugh and kindness, right? All the things that make you who you are things that you can be proud of, and you're just as good as anybody else on your path to equality. I would say Larry Hall, a former representative, now Secretary Larry Hall. It's been a laundry list, and the thing that people should know, and what I found, especially as I look at some younger generations, everybody think they know everything, and it's just not true. You don't know it all. You don't. And I have an 18-year-old son who fits the same category. And when you think about the fact, and the thing that people have to embrace is people were your age at one time, right? And that everybody can teach you something. But I think for mentors, what I've had to learn is that you also have to give it to people in ways that they can receive it, right? So, for example, my son and I, talking about getting on the road, right? And he wants to learn how to drive, wants to get a car. And I said, well, you might want to wait on that, because driving is a situational thing, right? You have to be able to react to what's going on. You need some time under your belt. And so what did I do? I said, you know what? Let's go to Charlotte to see my sister. On the way back, I let him drive. He drives for an hour. He's like, oh my God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense. It makes sense that, you need to know the way your body feels after 30 minutes of drive. You need to know what's going to happen when a semi truck comes on the side of you, right? When somebody darts out in front of you, when it starts raining. And so I think that I say all that to say that one of my messages to folks is you do have to give people the game in the way that they can really receive it. And sometimes it's situational, sometimes it's giving a little nugget, sometimes that's a quick text, sometimes that's nothing at all, right?
Mhm.
Because then your silence is like, well, wow, he didn't say anything. Is he letting me figure it out? Or do I need to call him? Does that make sense? And
Mhm.
so I think that it's, we get it wrong because we sometimes think we can just preach down to these young brothers about what you should do, knowing that you didn't do it right the damn first time on your own. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
That does. That does. So giving grace, but also knowing that you don't know everything. So be
Yeah,
open wherever.
that's
And
right.
what I hear you saying, something that I hear from the when we first started talking to now is, doesn't matter where you are and who you're in front of or who you're with or who happens to walk by, you can learn something from every single person. And it doesn't have to be a formal relationship to learn.
It does not. That's exactly right. I think what is it? You should treat them like they're one of the top five most important people of all time.
Mm.
And many times, what you find is that if you give that, like you said, that grace, that respect, it's hard not to get it in return, right? And that's not always the case.
Yeah.
But I think that it's something that as we look into the future of what sort of the world becomes, regardless of who you look like, I think that we're going to have to be able to humble ourselves and really take the time to just to learn from each other and to know, you know what? No, you don't know what I go through as a black man. You don't. Does that make sense? Let me tell you, let me teach you. I know you have read X, but you also now have to realize that, you know what, the way that history has been told has not been right.
Mhm.
Right. And so what you may think you know about me, you don't. And then vice versa. And so I think that this sort of, that dynamic of mentorship and the way that we have to grow and change is applicable to everybody. Um, and I hope that in the age of COVID-19, where we've been stuck in the house, it's allowed us to reflect a little bit.
Yeah.
You would hope it would have, right? But I really hope that people have taken the time to think about the fact that we can't be the same people in the same society 18 to 36 months from now.
Hmm. Hmm. And that brings me to, we were talking a little bit before we came on about just the way the pandemic has positioned, and like you said, I hate to give credit to the pandemic itself, but because
Right.
we've been in the house and because
That's
we've
right.
we've not been able to unplug from things that maybe we would unplug from before, right? Because we have nothing else to do. There have been images and different things happening which have led to civil unrest
Yeah,
in our country, and the response has not just been in our country, but the response has been worldwide
absolutely.
for a lot of the civil unrest. And I would like to think it's because of the pandemic had everyone sitting, not just Americans, right? Everyone is sitting home.
That's right.
And so it's
Never,
like, wait a
never has
minute.
happened in the history of the world. Think
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, never
The
has
whole
happened
world stopped at one time.
one time. And somebody, right? At least the universe is trying to tell us, right?
Mm.
That the way that we go about and think that and there's nothing wrong with capitalism, right? Because we all have to go out and make money in goods and services and selling your talents, but we have to embrace that some of the things that we go towards and chase may not be the most important things, right? That lo and behold, your health actually may be important, right? Looking at the plight of your neighbor, might be important. Understanding how systems, both current and historic, have impacted communities. One of the things that, especially when we talk about, healthcare, right? Healthcare, you talk about exposure. This pandemic has exposed what we have not done to support those most in need. And I think that when you look at it, some may have just taken off the lid and see it now. There's a long history of that sort of dismissal of the plight of people of color as it relates to the way that their bodies are impacted by medicine and the lack of preventative care and lack of access to insurance. And so now that we know it and it's out in the open, like we have to fix it, right?
Mhm.
Same thing with with things like broadband, right? You got kids of color, poor folks of all colors who, in a virtual world, we had to go virtual just like that, no warning. And so now, when a company or these conglomerates and industries say, well, you know what, it's too expensive to to do these things and to provide broadband service to everybody. No, it's not. It's a necessity in order for people to be able to compete.
Mhm.
And again, every argument against why you should help all has been completely defeated in my mind, right? You don't have a leg to stand on because guess what? If essential workers are not well, this economy shuts down. They, my wife and I use this term. We're '90s hip hop fans, right? But these people have put Def Jam on their back, right? They have held up an economy that is touted as the best that the world has ever seen. And yes, we have smart CEOs and executives, but who did it boil down to make it work through that? And most of those people look like who? Me and you.
Mhm.
And so I think that when we talk about not being able to come out, we have to come out better on the other side. You can't say that you didn't know, is what my heart is here. And I'm hoping that, even when it comes down to our politics, right? You really now have had a chance to see, well, gosh, this candidate said this about someone who was murdered in the streets. Does that make sense? I think that we have to embrace and understand that some people don't want us to vote. Some people don't want it to be an equal process. In this environment, that has been laid bare with what's happening in Wisconsin and what happened in Georgia, right? Do we want that to happen in North Carolina? What can we do knowing that this pandemic is impacting certain communities? What can we do to make it easier to vote? And if you don't do that, then why, right? And so the answers are pretty clear. And when you talk about history and again, who built this country, right, and how those people have been treated, and how systemic racism, redlining, and all those major factors have led us, Jim Crow, segregation, civil rights have led us to this point. And I think a lot of people are getting this, sort of drinking from the fire hose education, right, about what's happening. They're trying to grapple with it. But the thing that I will call, again, like Baldwin did, is you always knew, right? You always knew. Now it's just in front of you, and now you have to deal with it. So I don't give credit to this pandemic at all, but it has allowed everyone to stop and wait and sit with who we really are and how fragile this our country is, how fragile the American experience and experiment is, and that it is not guaranteed, and that we all have to look deep within ourselves and understand that we have to be a part of it, and that if we don't take care of everyone, this thing will crumble, right? And we have to continuously deal with it. And I've heard and I agree that if you do right by the least of these, right, in some cases, if you do right by Black and brown people, the folks who spend money, who are incredibly familial, who are part of holding this economy up as workers, everyday workers, then everybody benefits. So why not do it? Does that make sense? On top of the humanity conversation, why would you not want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to succeed? So those are my wishes, right? Those are part of my statements, but part of my wishes at the same time, that with all this knowledge that we've gained in the last 4 months, I really hope we do some gut checks.
So let's talk about that a little bit. I can't help to start with what is number one, what is leadership lacking? And I'm just going to open it wide. Black community, society,
Yeah.
wherever you want to go with that. What
Yep.
is leadership lacking, number one, as we're
Yep.
with civil unrest? And then number two, what you talked about capitalism. What is corporate America's responsibility
Yeah.
in this
Yeah. I
as
think.
well?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll start. I'm gonna have to get you to repeat that first one, but I'll start with corporate
Absolutely.
America one. Corporate America, absolutely. Again, if you look at the economics of how Black and brown communities spend money in America, I think you've seen the changes with Aunt Jemima and the Redskin. You know, some of those things. A lot of them saying Black Lives Matter, which is huge. Don't get me wrong. There are people who thought they would never see that type of action from corporate America in their lifetime. It is a clear departure from what happened in the 1960s. Right? They did not do this during the Civil Rights Movement. So it's huge. But if you want to take it a step further, and what I've said to companies that have engaged me on the topic is who's on your corporate boards? How diverse is your corporate board? Because if you talk about representation and diversity and perspective, you know, it starts there. The second thing is, you know, what is your levels of what's your management? How many people in your senior leadership? How many people, you know, have the ability to rise throughout the company? um, you know, what is your culture? Does your culture embrace diversity, or is it a system that is, you know, a good old boys network that keeps, you know, people of a certain status, women, you know, and people of color out? Does that make sense? And that doesn't necessarily have to overly embrace white men, but some of them can be left out too. So what, you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
does that culture allow for a fluidity throughout your system? I think the other thing, when you really boil down to it, is, you know, access to being one of the suppliers, right? What's your supplier diversity look like? These companies spend millions, right? Take Disney, take ABC, take, you know, some companies that you know and think about their brands every day. Who are they making rich by having to, like, they have to buy supplies from somewhere? And what, you know, what goals do you have to make sure that those companies are doing that? And when you take it a step further, especially when you start talking about contracting and construction and building, how many general contractors that are black and brown are, how, you know, where are they? Because, you know, you know, when you build those companies, those people are going to hire more people that look like them. They're at least going to give them a shot, right? They'll be, you know, more embracing of cultural diversity, and by empowering, that's how you help build communities, right? Black Wall Street in Durham, which is part of my district, the way that they were able to do a lot of what they did was because they had black ownership of businesses that allowed their employees to go out and be civically engaged, right? And that makes an incredible difference when you know your boss is allowable of the words that you say and your actions and being out in the street and doing the work that's necessary. And so, but just in general, but if you talk about generational poverty, if you talk about being able you know, to diversify economics, that helps when you talk about building communities. Those are the same when the little league comes or the school comes to ask someone to write a check, they can come ask them to write a check from someone that looks like them, right? Who's more than likely to give it to them. And lastly, what I will also say, and what I've seen firsthand, is that because of this Black Lives Matter, this sort of reawakening, lots of venture capitalists and angel investors have now said, "Oh, well, here's my information. Send me an email about your ideas, and we want to help, you know, um, black and brown entrepreneurs." You should be doing that anyway, right? But what it has exposed in sort of the corporate space is that people have been left out for years, right? They have been left out for years of that kind of access to intellectual and sort of money capital, right? And if you talk about what you can do, you can open those floodgates. You can make sure that lending is more fair. You can, you know, PPP came down with all these billions of dollars. Black and brown companies got cut short. And so I think it needs to be this sort of reimagining of what real inclusion looks like, and not just based on your network. I think one last thing, and I think this is huge, is when you talk about your hiring practices, and this goes to our school systems and everything, is where does your pipeline start, right? Where are you pulling your pool from? If you're serious about it, you're going to go above and beyond to work with counties and cities and organizations to make sure that certain demographics absolutely see your job posting, right? And then you're also going to build pipelines, HBCUs or with HBCUs and other schools, to ensure that those populations are then getting a chance to do the internship, right? or doing some sort of apprenticeship. And when you think about all those things, to some people this is new, but if we want to really know what we can do in corporate America, that is a huge part of it because it allows for access and then it provides direct opportunity where it never existed before. And one thing I can also say, which they've done a really good job of or starting to, is imagery, right? Representation matters. And so no more sort of Cleopatra as Elizabeth Taylor, right? Those days should be absolutely over because you need to ensure that the person who embraces or represents that community is also the one that authentically shows up to represent so that people can say, that's me, right? So a kid can say that that's who I want to be. So that's the corporate America answer. I think, what was the first one?
So no, but it leads right into, I believe, the other answer, because that's corporate America's kind of social responsibility, right, to the communities that they're in, to society. And you say to be diverse, to look for diversity, to extend their arms into places that maybe they haven't before, to hire and to make sure that their practices are in a way that all people have a chance, regardless of who you are and what your background is or what you may look like. So that's one side of the coin. So the other side of the coin then becomes leadership, right? Of us stepping up to be in those positions. Because sometimes, not all the time, so I'm not giving it out here, but sometimes there's no one there to promote, or there's no one there to be able to take advantage of that, or you send out the opportunity and no one comes or applies for that opportunity, even though you took the chance to put it out into certain communities or with other organizations. So in that case, what is our leadership lacking in our minority communities and in our Black communities that can help us kind of overcome the other side of the coin?
Yeah, no, I love that framing. The part of it, and that's sort of why I also ended with building the pipeline, because it is about exposure, right? If I have RTP, and this is actually a real example, like I mentioned to some of my companies that are in RTP, kids in Durham should be able to grow up, live, and stay in Durham and be successful, right? Black and brown kids. And that means that, guess what? You can't expose them at 5th grade to the fact that there are jobs paying $50,000 with an associate at minimum. But if you get more education, you could be living in Durham, $150,000, $200,000 job, being a scientist, being an executive. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then we have to be able to clearly sort of show that pathway, or at least that these opportunities exist, if you realize that the current crop is not there, right? That's sort of the planting the seed. That's going back to my chalk community roots, right? So you have to be able to do just that, is plant the seed so that the kid can do that. Nurses, doctors, engineers, you name it. I think the leadership, though, is a huge question. And it's not unlike sort of where we were in the 60s, right? Or even where we were post-Reconstruction, is that young people are really, going to have to take the lead, right? And they're going to have to do it in two ways. And some of it's just getting out, making your voice heard, showing up, doing the work, no matter where you are, corporate, community, church, organization, household. The other side of it, though, is watching and learning from others. Like I said, like I got a chance to do a little bit of both, but making sure that you do find someone who can teach you while you're also putting yourself in a space where you can be vulnerable and give yourself to service. Specifically for, and again, I think this sort of, the Black Lives Matter, the civil unrest, COVID has just really allowed people to sit with themselves in a way that's, it's like, what? I was not saying anything because I didn't want to lose my check, or I didn't want to have to show up overly, Black or urban to my white counterparts. I was reading Eddie Claude, and he was talking about his lack of embrace of Baldwin. And he was saying, I didn't want to read Baldwin because I was going to have to make my white counterparts uncomfortable, right? And I think that a lot of times, especially in corporate spaces, and in places where you're encompassing a lot of community, a lot of other communities, you know what, you don't want to have to be the one to do that. And all these things sort of in a perfect storm have made people have to step outside their comfort zone and provide leadership no matter where you sit. So that's the first thing that I want to say is provided. No, I don't care if you are the janitor. I don't care if you are the executive. I don't care if you're the mom who's trying to put together a teaching pod, right? You need to be asking the question about, well, who's not at the table? Does that make sense? No matter where you are, and I think that sort of distributed leadership is sort of the new model, is embracing the little change that you can make, but standing in your truth and standing in the way. I think as organizationally though, our divine nine organizations absolutely have to, along with our churches, have to embrace it and just be bold as hell, right? I think that we, and some do, some don't, but I think that these organizations that theme themselves as being the brightest and the best, right? The leaders in the community have to actually step up and do that, because what people in communities that are hurting or impacted are saying is they call BS, right? You're trying to be like something else. You're not really sort of standing in the way with all your intelligence and all your education to represent me. And so I think that is a wake. It should be a wake up call to them, not just to do their national service stuff, but to be on the front lines as organizations, not as their members. Like I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi, and I think that all of the Divine Nine and other civic organizations just need to like take this time to push the ball forward so hard that it feels like we're trying to shift the world in a day, right? Because that's sort of where people are, because they don't have time to wait. I've been poor for 20 years. I've been poor all my life. I've been poor generationally, and the time is up for me to stop for asking, right? I demand that these situations change, or I don't need you in front. And so, if people, in those organizations, those civic groups, want to continue to be seen as leadership, then they're going to have to act like it. And I would say the same thing for our churches. Now, churches have given a lot of historical, and then literally since the time of post-slavery, have given us a foundation from which to work from, congregate, and do those things. But I think that some people do think that the church has not been as bold as it could be. And while counterparts have used their platforms, especially evangelical churches have used their platform to be overly clear about conservative Christian values, whereas I don't want to get my 501c3 taken away, which is complete BS. Does that make sense? And I've always said that you can participate in the civic process without being partisan. There are things about our communities, healthcare, education, voting, just the act of voting and being involved, that have nothing to do with party, nothing. And so when people start to bear down on you about that, that means they don't want you to participate because they already know how this cannot end well for them. And so I think that we have to, as a religious community, and a lot of them do it, especially in places like Durham, but I think as a whole, we just have to embrace it and push hard, because again, a lot of folks, especially those who are in the streets now, are saying that while all of you guys are making building these organizations and growing got your nice houses and growing economically, you haven't done enough for people with me, because again, I am still poor. My project still looks the same, and we have to um, say not no what is it in our lifetimes these things will change. These things will no longer be what they used to, and I think that's sort of where all levels of minority communities should be, is, and I think that's where a lot of them are, right? Because that's where you sort of see these people saying, you know what, forget the system, forget structures, forget what's seen as supposedly normal. I am going to go out here and fight for my own rights, for my own survival, because you're too big on respectability politics, right? And being seen as having to do things a certain way. That ain't working for me, and change ain't coming fast. And so that's sort of where I think the leadership has to be if you want to be called a leader these days, right? You have to be willing to sort of raise your voice, show up, and I think one thing that it has also done as it relates to leadership, again, I'll talk about this distributed thing. It's again allowed people who have never thought that they were to be, and it's made people who were uncomfortable with being in all settings have to embrace being in all settings and being comfortable in their skin. And if you're not, then again, I don't need you around here. Go home.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to clear up something that you said. So you said organizations, civic organizations, and other organizations, but you primarily really talked about the Divine Nine. So I just wanted for people who don't know what the
Oh,
Divine Nine
sorry,
is.
sorry. I
No, you're
apologize.
fine. You're fine.
Yeah. So,
But that's, go ahead. I was gonna say that's just African American or Black sororities and fraternities, kind of the original sororities and fraternities that were formed and are very influential and usually are the top leaders when we talk about in the African American culture. They're usually the top leaders out of the universities and in communities and in societies for the most part, and they have a lot of leverage because they're international. They're
that's
not
right.
just national; they're international organizations.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, from MLK on down, right? I mean, you generally, when you peel it back, John Lewis was a member of Phi Beta Sigma. CT Vivian was an alpha. So when you peel it back, those people that are in those organizations are leaders and are out there doing things. My thought is, and this also, I'm glad you said universities, is that we have to push the ball forward as organizations and use that collective voice because, as you mentioned, they're very influential outside of their membership, right? And I think that, especially in this time, it's almost like we're in another reconstruction, right? Potentially, and another civil rights movement at the same time. And when you have that kind of wind at your back, this is not the gradualism, right? Of that Dr. King talked about. We cannot be sort of lulled to sleep and think that this change is on that our timeline, we're on someone else's timeline, right? We have to create that timeline and we have to be bold about that timeline because, again, it is literally for the survival of, of a people and a society, right? And you don't have a choice but to be able to speak out loud about the plight of our people. Again, COVID-19 is crushing our community, Black and Latinx. Education. Look at where the students, in those communities are on the educational totem pole, where folks are as it relates to home ownership, where people are as it relates to wage disparity. Does that make sense? And that's just the top 4 or 5. And when you know that, we can't then just go home and be comfortable because we've made it individually or we got a few shining stars that represent our organization. That's not you. That's not the organization. Um, and so I'm really, really passionate about this because, you know, there are so many times in our lives when you talked about the story, there's so many times in that story where stuff could have gone awry, right? And I could have been in a much, much different situation. Yeah. And you cannot, I always taught this, you're not separate from your community. So that kid in East Durham who just got shot in the head, because somebody broke into the house and started shooting, Tamir Rice, Trayvon, right? Those literally could be my kids. Does that make sense? And so their pain is my pain, no matter where I live versus where they live, right? And what their life experience has been. And so I think that when you start talking about this as a Black man and sort of where everybody sort of has to fit and jump in, we got to challenge folks to stop being comfortable. Because everybody likes to hobnob, right? Everybody likes to be important, but you can do that, but also get dirty too, right? And I think that that's where these organizations have to be, and it can't be incremental. It has to be, we're gonna be on the front lines. and we're going to just like our pastors all got together in Durham, black pastors, and said, and not all black, but just progressive pastors, and got together and said, you know what, we're not opening our churches back up, right? And we're going to tell you the reasons why. It's killing these kinds of communities. It's not safe. We don't know enough. People aren't wearing masks. Does that make sense? Like they were bold and they were clear. And I think that if we don't do that, we're going to find ourselves not in a new normal. We're going to be right back to where we started, and that will be so disgraceful as a society for us to put ourselves in that position. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping that young people will continue to lead and take on this distributive leadership model. But for our major organizations, including our universities, step up.
Mhm. You talked about being, thank you for that. You talked about being a dad, a husband. Um, and I got one or two more questions for you before we get out of here. But this has been so good. You talk about being a husband and a dad. I have to ask, as a black man who decided to get married, number one, and
Yeah.
then have a family, number two, um, what's the responsibilities that you carry on your shoulders and the hope and fears that you have as you see your kids continue to grow?
Yeah, it is. Man, that's a heavy question.
Mhm.
And the reason that it's heavy is because, again, like I was saying before, there's nothing to protect you from that. I don't care. You're a state representative. You're a president of the United States. If you're, worker number one, there is nothing that shields you from the reality of walking in this skin, right? And so, whereas I've been able to live a life that allowed me to see some bad parts of society, to allow me to see some good parts of society, and everything in between, that, you almost feel like sometimes you fail because they're having to then deal with some of the same things that you did. Does that make
Mhm.
sense? And then you're having to share the talk, right? This is what you do, this is what you don't do. Make sure you keep your hands on the steering, all those kinds of things. That's exhausting. And then you fear that they also may be in a situation where it doesn't go well, right? For them, even if it's engaging with the police or figuring out that somebody's looking at you differently when you're just sort of showing up as yourself and being bright and intelligent and not giving you a fair shake. It's incredible, right? Because our lives are different in many ways, but there's so many more compounding things that await them that you cannot control. And
Mhm.
so when you leave the house, or when you leave the house, right, you have to sort of arm yourself to be ready for it. But then when they leave the house, especially my younger two, because they have autism,
Mhm.
and so one is 6 and the other is 4. And so when you start to think about the fact that not only are they African American men, but then they're African American men that have special needs,
Yeah.
how is the world going to embrace them? And now I feel like I need not only clearly because my older one, is 18. I got to fast forward to try and make as much change as possible so that he can have a clearer path and a better shot to be who he is authentically, right? And to be successful. But then when you start to think about the younger ones, it's like, oh my God, right? You got to start that all over again. And again, think about the ways that you have to bring perspective to things like special needs. And the
Mhm.
fact that yes, there are people of color who deal with these things. And I'm dealing with some of that in the General Assembly right now, where I'm trying to pass a bill that will allow for police to know when they stop a vehicle if someone in the car has a special need, right? Because
Mhm.
you see blue lights and all that, some kids will freak out, they'll freeze, all kinds of things can happen. And if the cop doesn't know, we should do that, A, to make sure we protect officers, but then also to protect the passenger, right? And so some who don't have my perspective are like, well, we don't want to label. And I get that, right? You don't want to label because people do take it too far. But at the same time, with a growing number of kids of color, of all colors, having special needs, that could go deadly very fast, and it has in certain parts of the country, right? and it's I will say it is a barrier. Now I think that the way that young people are and the way that they're stepping up to share their voices, I think that again my 18-year-old, he's I think he'll be fine. Of course, he's figuring out life, but my younger ones, people definitely by the time they get older will be much more aware and embracing of those with special needs. So I'm fine with the way that the world is moving, but I know that there are certain things that they have to deal with that I won't be able to control, and I'm going to try my best to fix it, not only for them but for others like them. And so, but I love fatherhood though. It's amazing to see versions of yourself and people that you can pour into because you have the opportunity to have so much experience about life. Now, sometimes I don't think my oldest one listens, but I think that eventually, all kids will, right? They're just like I did with my grandfather. I underestimated the knowledge that he gave me, but now, man, you talk about words that I live by. I see the same thing happening with him, and I think one thing that gives me joy is when we can create, opportunities where what they don't care what's going on around them. They're just being kids, and I think that as folks who are African American and minority, we absolutely need to ensure that we create those kinds of chances as much as we can, because every kid just deserves the chance to grow up in a society where people aren't judging them and they can just be free and clear to see life, enjoy life, get out and smell the roses. And so I do enjoy trying to create opportunities for them without shielding them from what's happening in everyday society, because they do need to know and be aware. Yeah, I think I lost you. Let's see. Yeah, so internet has done that to me as well. I had a whole show, uh, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where I had to go outside. Something just dramatically happened where all the internet in my neighborhood just completely dropped off at the worst possible time. So I completely understand. But I do hope that everyone watching this um, just really gets a chance to sort of step up and think about how we're going to look after this COVID-19 pandemic is over. And I hope we all dig our heels in to embrace a world that's just a little bit more just, a little bit more fair for all people. And if we can do that, I think we'll be cooking with grease, as they said. So it looks like they'll be back in a little while. Internet service issues, so no problem. But one of the things I'll talk about while she is, we're waiting, is going sort of back to fatherhood. One of the things that I think, especially as Black parents and Black and brown parents, that we can't shy away from is ensuring that kids understand, especially if you've gone on to have a good life, is making sure that they know really what's at stake, and that this isn't everyone's experience. And so once they know that, and once they sort of have a sense of of gratefulness, they'll be able to sort of give back to their community and want to give back to their community. And that's one thing that kids grow up. I think most kids grow up selfish. They really do, right? But I think that we talk about fatherhood, one of the things that we're trying to, we try our best is to make sure that we have birthdays where they don't receive, gifts from people, right? Like what is your thing and who are you giving to? Um, and that's so important, especially um, because it's you got to know that for the grace of God go I. And I think that sometimes um, sometimes not all, but a lot of people, of course, are great. But I think that that's one thing that we've tried to do as best we can, because it's so important. I do not want a child of mine to ever feel like they're separate from their community because believe it or not, and I know that COVID has taught us this, we really rise and fall together. And it's not fair for you to ever think that you are different or better than anybody, especially someone that looks like you.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I have, we're rounding up our time, and I so thank you for being
Oh,
on today.
yeah.
But before you go, I have a quick fire question round for you.
Uh-oh.
And the question is, are you ready?
Yes. Let's go.
Okay. Favorite food?
Oh, favorite food. Pizza.
Pizza.
Hmm.
Okay. Any particular type of pizza?
Meat lovers. Love meat lovers pizza. Um, yeah, I love meat lovers pizza. It's just something about, all that coming together. I don't necessarily get a chance to eat it that often. In my household, we do pizza Fridays every night and family night. And so the kids dominate that. And so every once in a while, dad gets a chance to get a slice of meat lovers pizza.
Oh, okay. Uh, Favorite music? Favorite song?
Well, hip hop 90s. I'm a Tupac fan. So I don't necessarily know if I can give you all his titles because not all of them are great. I don't know if I go back and listen to them. But hip hop 90s, that's what I grew up on. Huge Tupac fan. But also, T.I., Wayne, of course Jay-Z and Biggie. But some of these new guys are decent too. But that's sort of my top 5 or 6 hip hop that I love.
Got you. Number one song you're playing anytime, any day.
Oh man. Let's see. Anytime that I'm playing, anytime, any day. Let's see. Hmm. What I say? Gosh, I play so much. I'm trying to think. What would I say if I had to? Um, that's such a good question. I don't know. I would probably pick off the So Many Tears, Me Against the World album, Tupac,
Okay.
mid
Okay.
90s. Love that song. Love that
All
song. I can
right.
play it. I can play it anytime.
Mhm. Mhm. Favorite movie?
Favorite movie, Coming to America, Eddie Murphy, classic. Probably
Why is
quote,
that favorite?
probably probably quoted at least once or twice a month. And I have a history of others, right? They're my sort of top 10 favorites. But I think that the genius of that movie is just you don't see it anymore. You don't see that kind of diversity in character in one
Mhm.
person. The settings, the storyline, the seriousness, sort of with the funny, the one-liners, the quotes. It really was. It's something I hope they don't try to repeat.
Mhm.
My wife and I love. It's one of our favorite comedies. I'll put it in this category. It's one of
Mhm.
our favorite comedies.
Okay. Favorite vacation or destination spot?
Uh, really good. Well, definitely the beach. And so we're Eastern North Carolina folks. So the first priority is trying to get to the beach as best we can. And we definitely love the mountains too. Asheville is one of our favorite places. One other place that I would mention is Southport, Ballhead Island. That area is really cool. But yeah, I love that because I love the water, but also love sailing. That's one of the things
Mhm.
people about me.
Sailing. You love to sail.
Sailing a
So
boat.
that
That's my lifetime plan after all this is over is be on a sailboat. Cruising and moving around the world.
just let the wind take you.
let the wind take me.
I love it. So that leads me to the last quick fire question, which is your favorite hobby.
Favorite hobby. So favorite hobby is I'm gonna have to put a couple together. Reading, when I get a chance to do it, um, anything that can sort of take my mind off of everything else, right? I can sort of dive in. That's why I love sailing. That's why I love reading, is because you can do those. One that is painful, but I love it, is running. So I love to run, put in miles on my feet. But boy, you talk about my knees killing me after that is over. But it's just something that I love, because I want to try and stay as much shape as possible, because once you get over 40, you got to work for
Especially with this pandemic and sitting home, right?
it. Yeah, they call it the COVID-19, right? Like the 19 that you got from sitting home from COVID.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your heart, and just bringing all of you to tell your story through your lens. This has been so much fun.
Yeah,
I
I
hope
enjoy
that
it.
we
Thank you.
do. Absolutely. I hope we can do it again sometime in the future, and find some other things to talk about. But I
Okay.
want to give you the stage to be able to leave whatever else is on your heart or mind that you might not been able to say, or it wasn't the right place to say it, to
Yeah.
whoever you want to say it to, whether it's an individual, a community, society, or the world as a whole.
Yeah.
I'm going to be quiet and sit back and let you take it away.
No, no. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I think that forums like this are have to be made more popular, and so I want to definitely give you kudos for creating it, and allowing people of all backgrounds, all Black men of all backgrounds, to sort of share their story. Because at the end of the day, and I said this during our interview, the world is going to have to reckon with our present and our past to create a brighter future for everyone. And the only way to do that is by listening to the voices that are impacted, and listening to the perspectives, and thinking in a way that allows us to begin again, right? To think about what a real new world and a new normal looks like, where everyone is treated fairly, or we're on the path to getting there. And that takes a lot of introspection. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of give and take, and it takes a lot of sacrifice, right? Because it's not just going to come. Clearly, we know that it's not going to come organically, and then we also know that the world, there are parts of the world who are going to push against it, right? Every time we make progress, there's going to be forces that want to push us back, and so I want people to really think about, when it's all said and done, when your kids and your grandkids ask you what you did during this time, I want you to be able to say, this is what I did, right? I, in some small way, helped the movement move forward, and I made sure that I made generate the lives of generations. Sorry, these are my little kids behind me. Um, that I made the world a little bit better for someone else, not just myself. And that's a real question that everybody's going to have to atone for at some point. And we know what we're doing and what we're not. And I hope that everybody gets a chance to step up, because our community needs us. The world needs us. It needs to see the brilliance of who we are. And we, as a society, need to make sure that we're embracing diversity, and making sure that everyone gets a chance to have an opportunity to maximize their lives. And so that's why I'm glad to be here. That's why I personally ran for office on a platform of a better North Carolina, because I believe in that. And so opportunities again like these, and opportunities that's in society, are just ripe for changing the world, and putting us in a better place. So I'm grateful for this, and I hope that anybody gets a chance to listen. They can find me at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Zack Hawkins NC, and my website is zackhawkinsnc.com.
Thank you again, Zach. And I think the young men were saying, "Okay, Daddy, we let you do your thing. Time is
Oh
up."
yeah. They don't
Time is,
care. They don't care who you are. They want daddy time when they want daddy time.
which is the good thing about kids, right? Because they don't care who you are. Period. they
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 don't
don't
care
put anything. They're just,
at
hey,
all.
this is what I need. This has been wonderful. Again, thank you. Like I said, for being here, for sharing your story through your lens. To our viewers, I say thank you for listening as Zach told his story through his lens. Hopefully, there was something that you learned that was different than what you knew before. If there's any part of you that kind of peeked up and said, that's different than what I've known it to be, or perspective that I've not had before, I hope that that allows you to kind of delve a little bit more into maybe some biases that you didn't even know were there. Biases that maybe in this time of civil unrest, in this time of the pandemic, in this time of just society changing and becoming something new, that you lean in to you first to check and see what is it that I can do from an action? What is it I can do to be better? How can I use my voice? How can I lend myself? But more importantly, for you first, family, community, and then the world. Thank you so much for viewing The Voices of a Black Man. We will be back tomorrow. This is a 30-day long journey every single day, and we have enjoyed every story that we've been able to have a conversation with and learn. 12 p.m. Eastern daily. We look forward to seeing you, and you have a wonderful day. Take care.